Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Raising the New Earth podcast. I'm your host, Noah Dory, and today's episode is titled Grief and the Holidays. Let's talk about it. So, the holiday season is often painted as a time of joy and a time of connection and celebration, but for many, it's also a time of grief, and where grief feels most acute, whether it's a loss of a dear one, a life transition, family drama, or simply the gap between expectation and reality. And this year, we are consciously opening the door to a conversation that many of us avoid grief during the holidays. And to help us unpack this tender topic, I'm honored to welcome Elizabeth Little. Liz Little is an incredible grief counselor. She is a family and marriage therapist. She has been volunteering at the hospice hospital for many, many years. She's also an amazing yoga teacher, meditation teacher, and artist. So please welcome her to our podcast. Welcome, Liz.
Thank you, Noah. That's quite an introduction. It's such an honor to be here and just to have the opportunity to talk about, as you kind of described this, it's almost taboo subject. And we think of this time of year as like the most wonderful time of the year. You're hearing Christmas music in the stores and seeing all the Hanukkah decorations and all of the celebrating that people are doing, and that is all wonderful. But for a lot of people out there, it's kind of a situation of wake me up when it's all over, because it can.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Raising the New Earth podcast. I'm your host, Noah Dory, and today's episode is titled Grief and the Holidays. Let's talk about it. So, the holiday season is often painted as a time of joy and a time of connection and celebration, but for many, it's also a time of grief, and where grief feels most acute, whether it's a loss of a dear one, a life transition, family drama, or simply the gap between expectation and reality. And this year, we are consciously opening the door to a conversation that many of us avoid grief during the holidays. And to help us unpack this tender topic, I'm honored to welcome Elizabeth Little. Liz Little is an incredible grief counselor. She is a family and marriage therapist. She has been volunteering at the hospice hospital for many, many years. She's also an amazing yoga teacher, meditation teacher, and artist. So please welcome her to our podcast. Welcome, Liz.
Thank you, Noah. That's quite an introduction. It's such an honor to be here and just to have the opportunity to talk about, as you kind of described this, it's almost taboo subject. And we think of this time of year as like the most wonderful time of the year. You're hearing Christmas music in the stores and seeing all the Hanukkah decorations and all of the celebrating that people are doing, and that is all wonderful. But for a lot of people out there, it's kind of a situation of wake me up when it's all over, because it can bring up a lot of feelings, especially if this is a first holiday season without a loved one. We see in our practice a lot of struggle during this time of the year. So I think it's really awesome that you've opened up the topic here in a public forum. There are a lot of big people with kind of big microphones that are talking about grief, which is wonderful. Anderson Cooper is one, All There Is. It's an excellent grief podcast that I know a lot of people have benefited from. A lot of big authors out there. So I feel like grief is kind of having a moment right now, which is a wonderful thing. I am by no means an expert. I like to kind of maintain that my clients are the experts in this, and I'm sitting with them on a daily basis and just listening to kind of what they're going through. A lot of processing happens in talking and holding space and reprocessing of memory. And And every holiday brings with itself like a whole set of memories. So in the wake of a loss, we're having to rebuild our lives in kind of a new way, which poses a lot of challenges for people.
Right. And we see a lot of, I hear of a lot of family gatherings and drama that can bring their own set of challenges, especially when grief is in the mix. How can, in your professional opinion and in your experience, how can people navigate tricky family dynamics during this time?
That's an excellent question. One of the main things that we work on as grief counselors, therapists, is this kind of notion of self-care. Self-care has kind of a lot of different pieces to it. It's a word that gets thrown around a lot in grief. I like to use this kind of pyramid type tool based off of Phil Stutz's work. I don't know if you've seen the Netflix podcast that he came through with called The Tools. Essentially, the idea is like at the base of the pyramid, you have like the physical part of you. So you have the sleep. Am I getting hydrated? Am I getting out and getting enough exercise? Like that kind of physical piece. In the center of the pyramid, so like the next level up would be relationships. So a big part of self-care during the holidays is boundary work. And this can look different for a lot of people depending on tradition. You know, what have I done in the past over the holidays versus what is this going to look? How much gas do I have in the tank? Mm-hmm. Grief is so depleting. It drains you of kind of your energy, your cognitive ability. So it's kind of this dance of what do I have the capacity for? How am I going to do this without hurting feelings and helping people, communicating with people to help them understand what I'm going through during this difficult time. We tell people to have like a plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Plan A might be I'm going to follow through with the traditions, and I'm going to show up, and I'm going to bring the food I always brought, and I'm going to go through this, and I'm going to battle my way through. Plan B might be I'm going to give myself an out just in case I do arrive. I'm going to know where my exits are. That way, I may even assign like a point person to kind of tap on the shoulder and say like, hey, this is a little too much for me. I'm going to go ahead and go. Will you just let people know? And then there's the I just can't get out of bed, which is the reality of grief. And I'm going to kind of be all over the place here a little bit because there's so many avenues that come with this thing of grief and bereavement. One, like, I feel like there's like two truths that come with grief and bereavement. The first truth is that grief is messy. Picture like a bowl of spaghetti or just like a big knot with like a bunch of strings tied in a big knot, and we're really like pulling one string out at a time. And in any given hour, you could feel anger, sadness, shame. You could be triggered by something. It can come in waves. So the unpredictability piece is something that doesn't really get talked about a lot. And I think it has people feeling lonely in a room full of people. So in that pyramid of relationship, right, if the physical is off, it's going to affect the relationship piece. So if I wake up and I'm feeling terrible, boy, I'm probably not going to be good company for people. So having that awareness, and I'm sure you could speak to this, just in your work, when the physical's off, it affects the relationship. And then at the top of the pyramid is my spirit and myself and my heart and all of the things that kind of weave that together. So in the chaos, having kind of an organized way of thinking about yourself, I feel like is a super helpful tool for a lot of my clients. I have them hang the pyramid on their refrigerator and they look at it every day and they kind of go like, where am I in this? We're Americans. We like organized, tidy boxes. We like to put things in a compartment, like the Kubler-Ross kind of what we think of the grief stages are really for people who are dying. That was what the research was intended for. So, and this might be news to some people, like sometimes we think grief, we think stages. Unfortunately, that's not the true nature. It's like, it would be wonderful if we could just do the stages, right? And then just kind of like, okay, I'm good, I'm done, I get my gold star and I get to move on. And the reality is that's just not how it works. So we have that chaos, that truth of that is chaos. And then the second truth is that we carry this grief with us for the rest of our lives. And so it's something that we kind of learn to live with as we move through our lives and rebuild ourselves. Yeah. So there's so many pieces to the puzzle. We kind of talk about touchstones. If we're not going to be able to work in phases necessarily, we do know that there are certain pieces that we can kind of focus on our attention on to help us manage. So it's a terrible sales pitch in grief. Like clients come in and they want me to fix them, like fix me, I'm in pain, and fix my pain and take it away. My first instinct is I want to save you, I want to give you a hug, and I want to take away your pain, right? But that's not an effective way to work with grief. So we like to think of it in a way of like we're helping people manage the grief. And so in managing the grief, there are different kind of arenas that I can work in to give myself a little bit of focus. Yeah. So.
And what you said was very important. I think you need to give yourself some grace. You don't have to meet everyone's expectations. Hence all the plans and those family gatherings. If you can anchor yourself with a ritual, you have a to-go to tool, then it can feel both intentional, grounding, and freeing when you need it.
Absolutely. People tend to place what I think a lot of people find is that, and they run into with the relationship question, is people have expectations based on their own experience with grief. So I may be, out and about and I run into a friend and they're like, oh, you look so great. You must be, over, you must have moved on. And it can kind of play out in a social situation like a holiday gathering that way. And so part of this work is managing what's coming at you from various people around you. One of the tools that we like to give people that we get a lot of positive feedback on this one is that when I'm grieving, I need a companion. Mm-hmm. I need somebody who can sit with my pain, not try to fix anything or make any judgments or assessments or suggestions. Just this person that's here that I can call, that can be beside me and just hold space. Then there's the second type of person, which is the distractor. This is a person that I can call to go take a break from my grief, right? If it's feeling very heavy, giving yourself the grace to take a break is a wonderful thing to do when you're absorbing these waves of this pain that might be flooding in, especially during the holidays. So I don't have the expectation that person is going to necessarily ask me about the person, right? So I manage my expectations knowing I'm calling the distractor to go to the movies or whatever. Then the third one is the toxic bucket. it. My group members are like, we put a lid on that one. We have like, the people that are telling you things like saying kind of unhelpful things. Your person is in a better place. They're not in pain anymore. A lot of these things kind of land really painfully with the griever. Um, and so we want to be mindful of those people, and a lot of times those toxic people are family members, right? And so we have to be in a setting with them, but we can kind of ground ourselves by recognizing, hey, maybe I'm gonna kind of be over here with the supportive person more than the toxic person, and I can kind of set a little mental boundary. They don't have to see it, right? So that's kind of another tool that we use um, in navigating relationships around grief. It's a
And
hard work.
it's hard. I think it's hard on both sides, as you know, the therapist and the one that's grieving. We often, or at least I often, hear about the importance of community in times of grief. And you just mentioned the role that a person plays in that. What role does community play, especially during the holidays, would you say,
In grief.
in grief?
Oh, that's a good question, Noah. That's kind of an interesting question. I guess I can think of one kind of example. We just had our Light Up the Life ceremony with the organization that I work with. It's where everybody gathers and honors the people that they have lost by writing
Mhm.
their name on kind of like a star, and they place it on a tree and light it up, and then pass around the microphone, and you can say your person's name out loud. Kind of this public acknowledgement of the passing of loved ones. I think is a really beautiful way to kind of break down the taboo of talking about death and dying, because I kind of you kind of brought this in at the beginning, which I really appreciated, is that we're our problem and discomfort with grief and bereavement really does stem from our discomfort with death and dying.
Hmm.
And so the two kind of go hand in hand. So when we have these kind of communal acknowledgments, we do a butterfly release with with the hospice that I volunteer with. These kinds of things, and you have people crying like in public, and normalizing. Hey, this is painful, right? We're all together in a space, bringing kind of a healing energy to the collective, recognizing that we're all experiencing these difficult emotions that we tend to kind of suppress because we're told from a very early age, like, don't be sad, or, I don't know, we find corners to cry in or we shove a tissue in someone's face when they start crying because we feel discomfort, with that. So when you collect people and emote kind of together, it can be a very powerful experience. And I see a lot of that in yoga class. Every once in a while I'll have somebody just burst into tears, and then they're like apologizing, like, no, 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 like, sit with it, right? That's how we process, and if we can process with other people around, then we know that we're not alone, and I,
Yeah.
I find, like, in my groups, that's the biggest takeaway that everybody talks about. Sharing in a confidential space, people can really, we've kind of named our group kind of like parking lot talk. Like, we're going to let go of the formality stuff and really get to the nitty gritty. That's where the real kind of processing the reality of what this looks like in people's private homes, or, yeah. So it's kind of interesting.
So, in your opinion, and grief, I think, just like any other emotion, is a teacher, right? It can be transformative. how do you see the difference between your male clients and your female clients transforming into the next stage from that grief?
Yeah, like, do I see kind of a distinction between men and women? That's
Yeah.
an interesting question. I could get into some hot water here, so I have to kind of be careful about how I answer that, I think. Um, it's interesting because I have a kind of evenly weighted number of male and female clients,
Mm-hmm.
and each grief is so unique, and each grief is so individualized based on a life history, based on previous losses. Are they a cognitive griever? In other words, do they internalize their emotion? Or are they on the other end of the spectrum? Maybe they're emotive, right? Maybe they're somewhere in between. Most people kind of fall somewhere in between. So there's all these factors about, like, regarding like personality and this dance between the head and the heart,
Mm-hmm.
which occurs, that it's hard to really gender. Yeah, it's hard to really put female grief and male grief when we're talking about the loss of a person, like a loved one. I don't see a lot of distinction. Some of my male grievers are very cognitive, some of my female grievers are very cognitive, so their grief tends to look kind of similar.
Mm-hmm.
My emotive grievers, if they're male, will tend to kind of like be the ones to apologize for becoming vulnerable in a space. Like, they really, that's where the core of the work is.
Mm-hmm.
So when I get a client that has a wall, right, I'm working to kind of see if I can create a space that feels safe enough for them to open up. And that's kind of, but I have female clients that put the same exact wall up. So
Mm.
I'm not,
Interesting.
yeah, it's,
I feel that men were raised, or at least, my dad's generation, when I'm looking
of
at it,
course,
they were
yeah,
raised to bottle up their emotions. And
absolutely.
I got some of it as well.
Yeah,
And I bottle up my emotions.
yeah.
Um, and I feel that I don't want to necessarily see that in my kids. I want them to let go, but it's also very uncomfortable for me to see them
Totally.
in distress and pain. So it's that.
Yeah. That's, you bring up a very good like aspect of this, and that's that generational thing. So if I have older griever male, right, they are definitely a lot more conditioned to bottling up, and kind of what the transformation starts to occur with these. If I can help them open up, right, if something shifts for them, wow, what a change occurs.
Mm,
Like, I have male clients who, I kind of ask them, like, what do you see difference, from the time you started the grief counseling to like kind of now, and like maybe before the death, after the death. I hug my kids, I say I love you, but that was very uncomfortable for them because, just as you
right,
said, that was not the role that they traditionally played, right, or represented. A lot of role shifting in
right.
loss. And that affects the way things unfold as well. Yeah. And I think a lot of times men tend to be up here. I guess that would be a distinction I could make. Like,
Hmm.
as a mother, your heart just, you operate from here, I think, a lot. Or even just females in general. I mean, I'll just say, like, I feel like I operate from here sometimes more than here, whereas like my husband would be like always up here, and like, so there's this kind of balance, right? Part of reconciliation process in grief is finding like this kind of connection between the
Mm,
head and the heart.
Mm-hmm.
And once that starts to occur, we'll often see kind of the pain of grief kind of intensify a little bit, because boy, is it a scary, it can be scary to drop into the heart, right? Ooh, we got to really be mindful of the tender space here. It's almost like an open wound. I kind of tell people, like, you're walking around with this open wound, and people can't see it though. So, you know, that would be kind of one distinction that I see. A lot of my female clients, speaking from here, a little more, men are heady. They want to fix,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
I know that you recently came back from a celebration of life of
Yes.
of a close
Yeah.
family member. Can
Yeah.
you expand on that and add what are the highlights of doing a celebration of life as opposed
Oh,
to a funeral, or in order to be more in tune?
yeah. Yeah. I really, and I'll probably inject a personal opinion that maybe some people don't agree with, but I'll just kind of risk it. Um, the celebration, the funeral, the tradition, the ritual, I feel no matter what kind of form it comes in, I mean, it really is for the living. I mean, we're honoring the person who passed away, but there's something that occurs in that process that I believe kind of helps people's hearts accept the reality that the person is gone. We had this pandemic, and a lot of people, had their loved ones cremated, or they had to put the celebration off,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe they postponed it for a year or two, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it can sometimes create this kind of liminal space for people. Well, they're it's almost like you're not grounded in
Uh-huh.
the person's passing. I don't like the word closure, because we don't close our hearts to the person that we lost.
That's beautiful, actually.
Right? It's
I was about to
like
say they may need
we
closure, but then it's a good thing you said
we
you don't like the word closure.
I hate it. It means that we're closing a door, right?
That's so true.
Um, and it comes back to that truth that I was kind of referring to earlier, which was that we carry this with us through our entire life. Just because the person isn't physically here, we still have a relationship with them because we miss them here and we think about them. And having traditions, having rituals, there's a lot more that goes into it than just the day of the event, right? There's the thinking about the person's life. There's almost like a life review that we go through traditionally. We're writing a eulogy. Maybe we're remembering parts of their lives. We're gathering people together to, that goes back to that community. It's like a communal acknowledgement that this person lived and this person has passed away. We're image makers, right? We take in image, and part of that ritual can help our mind start to speak to the heart about the reality of the passing when we participate in this process. It requires us to slow down,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is something that is counter to most of our daily interactions. So I guess I'll just add, like, part of this work, a large part of my work with people is slowing down,
Mm-hmm.
taking time to honor somebody, putting thought into it. The food, the flowers, whatever you're doing, coming together to create something, I think is very healing, and it can be kind of a one stepping stone out of the wilderness. So
How do you think, because you are an amazing yoga and meditation teacher, and I got to experience your yoga practice many times. And you always have these beautiful life lessons, and your present on its own, just your present, is very reassuring and very relaxing. How can mindfulness or meditation practices be used to
Oh,
stay present when grief surfaces?
gosh, I was hoping you would ask this question. Thank you so much. Yay. Um, so part of this process is like, who am I?
Right.
Like, if I lost my parent, right now I've lost a foundational piece. If I've lost my spouse, I've lost my life witness, right? Or a sibling, let's say. If I've lost a child, right, I've lost a future. And so my identity might be mom or wife or daughter, right? Now I'm without this person and I am rudderless, right? And I know you and Yvonne kind of talked about this, and I wholeheartedly agreed with her words about meditation, yoga, even just being alone in nature allows us to connect back to the self, right? If we have these practices that we've carried with us along the way, we have a sense of self that's a little different than what we're receiving from other people. And that in itself is such a great building block for being in the moment. I feel anger. We use this kind of acronym called RAIN. I'm going to recognize what's coming up for me right now. And then I'm going to acknowledge I'm going to acknowledge it. Ah, yeah, there's the rage. Here it comes. These are messengers, right? They're not meant to frighten us, although they can feel frightening. What do I need right now to move through this? What do I need? Do I need a drink of water? Do I need to go for a walk? Do I need to call a friend? And so we kind of can move mindfully that way. Let's say I never knew, now I don't know who I am. Like I'm totally blank, right? And I need some tool to try to help myself reconnect with myself. Meditation is a wonderful, sitting alone, doing something that's your own, can help start to build those blocks of self, meaning and purpose. What is my meaning and purpose now that I'm no longer this person's spouse? And so being mindful from the moment to moment can help us move through and process emotion. Here comes rage again. I know what this is. I've worked through this before. I know that it's not as bad as it was the first time that I encountered it. I know what to do. The more we have plastic minds, right? The more we kind of retrain, the softer those really tough emotions and memories and things become. So it's just, I would say, like, if one day when I have my private practice, it will be a cornerstone of what I'm offering people, because I think it's so important to come back to self,
Very much. So what would be some of the signs that one may need additional support, like therapy or support group during the holiday? Like, what would be something that you notice in people that you can say, oh, you could use, therapy, or you could use seeing someone who is a professional grief counselor like yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Now, I'm only specializing in grief and bereavement as a therapist. I'm trained, however, to recognize, hey, maybe this is something a little bit deeper. Like, if the person finds that they're communicating to me, like, I am uncontrollably crying and I can't stop and I can't regulate myself, and it's really affecting, like, I will direct them to talk to their physician. Like, there might be something else happening here outside of the grief, underneath all the grief, that's preventing you from taking a step in a healing direction. Groups can be really wonderful. I have a group of, it's a spouse loss group. You'd be surprised how much we laugh in there. It's usually hinging around, you know, uncomfortable things that people say to them. And we just, you know, we have a good laugh. I think getting validation from others that you're not kind of crazy is like a huge part of this. You can feel like you're going crazy and like you're really doing grief wrong. And just knowing that there's no right or wrong in this can be very freeing, very validating. Like, hey, you know, according to these people, I should be doing this, right? So we always say, like, should. It's a banned word. Like, if you're shoulding all over the place, that makes a mess, right? So, like, we don't want to do that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so just finding support groups. You know, checking in on people who, you know, have recently lost somebody and here come the holidays. Are just wonderful ways. I know a lot of people say, like, gosh, so many people showed up for me, and then it just went blank. Right? We get on with our lives, and then we forget about people's, you know, losses in the holidays. I mean, going back through your Rolodex of the year and kind of thinking, oh, you know, maybe somebody might just want to hear from me. Like, how's it going? You know, just I'm thinking about you through this tough time. I'm here if you need to talk.
I love that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question adequately.
No,
Or,
very much, very much, very much so.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Grief. I had a real quick, a member of my group last night came in with this awesome metaphor I thought I'd bring in today. And it's just like when you walk into a weight room, like, and you're looking at all of these weights, right? Like if you look at the 150-pound weight and like, it's like, yeah, there's no way I'm going to be able to pick that up. And like, you go over and you try, and it's like, I can't even wrap my mind around picking that weight up. Like, but I can pick up the 10-pound weight, right? And so when we're doing this work of processing and kind of exploring with curiosity without judgment, we build these like fake, these grief muscles. You can't see them, but they're there because you've done this kind of mindful processing or validation through talking out loud to other people. I can pick this 10-pound weight up for a while and I can get strong there with that one. Then I can put it down and, hey, maybe now I'm ready for this, you know, and you kind of see that progression occur. And then before you know it, I'm lifting the 150-pound weight, you know, without really thinking, trying too hard, because I've started that process of making very small adjustments.
Right.
And those kind of can lead to, you know, over time, a lot of my group members will look back and say, oh my gosh. And when a new group member comes in, I remember when I was there. Wow, I've really done a lot of work around this and I can see a difference. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's very similar to Atomic Habits, the book by James Clear. I think he wrote it. So the more you do it, the more you can come back to those same tools and maybe in increments can build more on it.
Yeah, and kind of it's kind of a dance. I'm engaging something painful, but I'm also in control, so I can kind of lean in and out of it. The more I kind of turn and face it a little bit in my own comfort zone, the
Mm-hmm.
less and really what I see with a lot of people is they learn so much about themselves through this process without even realizing it, that when a new person walks in, they're holding space for them. And it's this beautiful, like, machine. I don't really even do a lot in my group. They are the ones that are supporting one another. So it's a really wonderful thing to witness.
Yeah, I think when it comes to your work or my work, it's being that vessel that allows for this communication between them to go back and forth. It's almost like permission to share.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
And I know that you wanted to read something for
Oh yeah.
us today.
Yeah, I we use at our center. There's a wonderful. There are so many amazing grief educators out there. David Kessler's one that a lot of people go to. Megan Devine. Um, we like this one educator called Alan Wolfelt.
Oh,
He has a very gentle way of approaching grief that we often turn to in our practice. This book is Grief One Day at a Time. So if you're a grieving person in the holidays or any really every day, you can kind of open this up and it has a different kind of quote and kind of expansion and affirmation. I found that one from a couple of days ago that I thought was really kind of general and really nice way to kind of wrap things up today. And so the quote is by George Eliot. She was no longer wrestling with the grief, but could sit down with it as a lasting companion and make it a sharer in her thoughts. Our grief will soften, but it will be with us forever. Since it is now a permanent part of our lives, we have a choice. We can consider it an enemy or a friend. Treating our grief as an enemy means disliking it, wrestling with it, and avoiding it.
mhm.
Treating it as a friend means welcoming it, paying attention to it, and holding it close. When we sit down with our grief as a lasting companion, we surrender to the truth that, like its twin, love, grief teaches us what is most important, and if we allow it to, always offers wise counsel. Far from an enemy, grief is now a best friend. Who would have thought? And the affirmation is, my grief is a lasting and trusted companion.
Wow, that's very powerful. I love that.
Yeah, the idea being that if we can learn to befriend this thing, it doesn't have as much power over us. And we shift to remembrance and connection.
Right.
Yeah.
Liz, that was a very, very important conversations, and I am so thankful to you for sharing your beautiful soul with us.
My gosh, thank you for the opportunity. I really felt like I was talking like a million miles an hour. If you're out there and you don't need to suffer in silence, there are a lot of groups, a lot of resources. You could connect with me maybe through my work email or my Instagram page, my art page, and I'd be happy to connect you with those. So there's no reason to suffer in silence through the holidays, and I hope this conversation, kind of helped some of you out there that are going through heavy loss this holiday season. So it's been my pleasure to talk with you, Noah. You yourself are a dynamo, and I can't wait to see where this goes. Yeah. So
Thank
thank
you
you.
so much. Thank you, Liz. And to our listeners, again, just remember that the holidays don't have to look or feel one way, and it's okay to hold space for grief, and it's okay to enjoy simultaneously. And until next time, take care and keep praising the new earth. See you later.